Yes, viewers, it's James Kalm, your half-assed reporter, the guy on the bike. And today we are in Greenpoint. They've got a big art festival up here. But I was invited by Phong Bui to drop in here at the Johnathan and Barbara Silver Foundation. And we're going to take a look at some sculptures by Johnathan Silver. I believe Johnathan Silver was a Brooklyn artist, born here in 1934 or something like that, and I believe he passed away in 1992. And this is an exhibition that's been organized by the people in his foundation, and I was invited by Phong Bui, publisher of the Brooklyn Rail, to come in and take a look at this, but I was so fascinated that I decided I would take some time and let you take a look at his sculpture. Also, Michael Brenson is kind of the moderator, the MC, the master of ceremonies, so I'll be splicing in some of his little talk. So this is actually some interesting work. We've got some very figurative things that Johnathan did, but then he's also got these very kind of ragged, modern, almost abstract, expressionistic sculptures. And I think the other thing that they were talking about is that Johnathan was very much influenced by the work of Giacometti.
Johnathan has known Michael and vice versa. They've been friends in the late 60s, more or less. And their common interest, very profoundly so, has been the work of Giacometti. And Michael stayed on course, becoming historian, art critic, mostly sculpture, but occasionally you wrote about painting too.
Yeah, a lot actually.
A lot of, okay.
Occasionally meaning.
But Johnathan himself had been steadily, obsessively working on his work as a sculptor, and wherever the sense of existential, gravity, whether it's really moderate in some way, verticality and everything that actually Michael just shared the famous article on Giacometti and Cubism with Alex not long ago. It's really all about that complexity of modernism, and I would say I would add Freudian analysis in a very deep way. So without saying furthermore, I think I'm just going to turn the mic over Michael.
First of all, thank you for coming. It's wonderful for us, wonderful to have you here, and I'm just so sort of interested in any of your responses. I just wanted, this is Marion Smith, and this is what you see is Marion's doing. She was entrusted by Barbara Silver, Jonathan's widow, to begin the foundation. And it's Marion who took all the work out of the studio, which is what you're looking at here, and installed it. And and has kept this going. So she's really the guiding spirit of what goes on here. Johnathan was born in 1937. He was born in Brooklyn. His parents were both Orthodox Jews. His mother had Lithuanian Jewish royalty in her, and her father, Eddie Silver, was like a New York story, coming up from the Lower East Side and then putting himself through Harvard and then becoming a Brooklyn district attorney. He dropped out of school at 13, and he was essentially homeschooled from 13 to 22. His early heroes were Beethoven and Julius Caesar, and his first sculpture was a sculpture of Beethoven. And he also studied music. He studied music at Juilliard, and was a pretty rowdy kid. And his parents had all sorts of concerns about what would happen with him. And he enrolled in the Columbia School of General Studies at 22. I think that was the point at Columbia where anybody could enroll, right? You didn't have to apply to it. But then he started to get involved with art history and studio sculpture, and most particularly in art history with Meyer Shapiro. And Shapiro became a very big figure in his life. I don't think it's probably possible to overestimate the importance of Shapiro as a teacher, as a mentor, as an intellectual, as someone who had the kind of oratorial and rhetorical skills that Johnathan admired and in some ways really picked up himself. At any rate, he went through Columbia. He started a PhD program in art history, and he was doing his PhD thesis on the painting of Giacometti. And at the same time that he was doing the thesis, he was taking sculpture courses from Peter Agostini. I don't know if any of you know Peter, but he was a very prominent figurative sculptor in the 60s, and a whole sort of subculture grew up around Peter. And Johnathan was caught between art history and the making of sculpture, and at a certain point he just gave up art history to become a sculptor. He and I met in 1967, as Phong was saying. We met in Baltimore through a mutual friend named Gary Moore, who was a poet. I thought when I met Johnathan, he was just one of the most extraordinary people I had ever met. You're commenting on his intensity and his intelligence. And then throughout the early 70s, we got together, and I was in his studio a lot as he was making these heads. And in the 70s, the heads were what he did. And there were a set of problems that he was interested in. He was interested in structure, obviously. He was interested in volume. He was interested in form. He was very much against the notion of narrative. And it might be hard to think back on those times, but there were reasons for that resistance to storytelling and anecdote and what was identified with sentiment. But he was someone who lived with stories, and he lived with stories, and he lived with rhetoric, and he was trying in his own way through this very rigorous kind of analysis, which is definitely affected to some degree by Giacometti, and as Phong said, by psychoanalysis, in the exploration of these heads and how they work, and what you could do if you took a head apart, or you took one side and you flipped it around, and you looked at it from the other side, and then the head would really open up, and all these psychological effects that were based on a really kind of intellectual and searching practice. You can probably find signs of Messerschmitt in there too, if you know who he was. But anyway, and this is the kind of work that Johnathan made through the 70s, and then in the early 80s there was a pretty substantial shift. What he had done before that was really a reaction against narrative, or trying to make expressive, significant work that did not include storytelling, and then it turned around and it became quite a profound interest in narrative. It was triggered probably by his trip to Florence in 1982 and seeing the Medici Chapel, which completely blew his mind. and made him feel that if you had sculptures in a space, the sculptures could work on the space in such a way that created a theater of ideas. And then after that, he started to show, and I was at the New York Times after 1982, and I reviewed him pretty regularly. He had probably his most important show to that point, 85, 86, at the Greenpoint Gallery, where he did an installation that was a theater that included references to all sorts of classical and biblical figures. There was a chapel of Alexander Severus in it, and many of his figures, and some of the figures here will, like Wounded Amazon, which is right in front of you. This figure here will give you some idea of the way he was working figuratively, and he showed more and more. He had a very significant show in 1989 at the Sculpture Center and did a whole installation. He took it over, called it the Lower Room. He did another installation called the Subway, so everything was kind of subterranean and underneath, and many recurring figures, the figures of his wife Barbara. The figures of the women there are his wife Barbara, and they were included in that installation. And this kind of way of thinking about art just kept growing. And in 1991, he got sick. He was diagnosed with lung cancer in the fall. He would live another 8 or 9 months. The last installation he did at the Victoria Monroe Gallery was called The New Gretchen. It was another kind of figure, more realistic in some ways, maybe also more expressive, also more timely, because it was more the most overtly political work that he had done. And the work was just moving in a completely different direction, and then at a certain point suddenly it was over. And so, this is a person who's like a deep part of our lives. We knew him as a person. Marion knew him as a teacher. He was a wonderful teacher at Montclair State University, where he taught really the last 25 years. And this foundation has been in existence for a number of years now. There have been group shows, the Rental Gallery, Nicole Klagsgrum, who put him with Matthew Monahan. Marion did a beautiful show at the Studio School in 1919. There's so much to say about the psychoanalytic aspect of the work that Phong referred to, but even the kind of strict frontality and the way of thinking about the Rorschach test, and what would happen through symmetry and through the slightest kinds of shifts in symmetry, and the forms of association that would be set in motion just by the most insignificant almost kinds of shifts of line and form, and where you could go with that, and the way you could understand it. I mean, I think, he picked up Shapiro's remarkable understanding of experience psychology and the social world in form. So he could take a head, and he could take an action on a head that seems like a purely intellectual kind of gesture, and just really understand that in multiple sort of psychological and associative ways. And he's I see these heads very much as frontality was such a big thing in sculpture. I mean, it's true in the whole hieratic traditions of sculpture through time, and that those hieratic traditions are also some kind of debate about power and about the particular mode of address with the viewer. And I see those heads as very much being an engagement with authority and power, a way of trying to find a way to assert that in sculpture, and at the same time undo it, or reverse it, or deal with it in a different way. So these kinds of concerns about statuary that run through modern sculpture in very subtle ways, I think they're very much they're deeply embedded in this work as well.
He was saying that he passed away in 1991, 1992. So it's 30 years ago. Is there anything in particular that makes you think that this work would be reconsidered now and be considered maybe more significant, and people will sort of see it with new eyes? Is there any chance that is going to happen?
I hope so.
I mean, is there reasons? I mean, people are constantly reassessing things, and they are looking at classical art a little more because they're kind of getting bored with, the commercial product.
I mean, I think, do I believe that? I do. Do I feel that I have a clear way of articulating it? I'm not sure. I have former students of mine who come in here and they've never seen the work and they don't know the set of ideas that the work comes from, and there's kind of amazement in it. There's a kind of way in which the work has an impact on them, because it looks familiar, but yet like it's something that nobody has really quite seen before. It comes out of certain traditions of working from the model, but not really, and goes off in different directions. I think maybe, this question of the body now, and what the body means, and how to configure it or reconfigure it, or how to keep thinking about it and treating it in a way that it has some kind of viability in the present, because I think Johnathan was reinventing these figures in ways that are very strange. And these are kind of conglomerate configurations, and even the gender aspects of these figures are sometimes quite surprising and fluid. So I have a feeling that I certainly have the feeling that for people to come in and look at it now, that they would find something. There's a lack of preciosity in the work, and a real openness to experiment and be in the moment and be in the intensity of the moment. And I feel all that has got to have a certain purchase in this moment too.
Are the drawings from the same time as the heads?
Yeah, the drawings, absolutely. The drawings cover pretty much the whole career. And,
the whole career.
Yeah, and if you follow it around and where you'd see a lot of the work that's done from the model, which this whole group of figurative sculptures that I was mentioning, sculptors, was invested in. I mean, they would do that for hours at a time every day. It's part of the studio school discipline as well. But I think, you look at the other works and then at a certain point too, after the early 80s, where the imagination takes off. And then they become more about a kind of fantasy. And then again, you get this element of strangeness.
Mixing the dog head or the...
That's right.
Or the overdrawn kind of like drawing it 3 or 4 times over the top.
Right. And there's, sort of strange, sexual images there too, and you don't know really where they're coming from, but whatever he felt like putting down on paper, he put down on paper.
Yeah.
And somehow there's a connection between the extraordinary discipline of those works and the kind of freedom and fantasy on the other side. And, I feel like in some ways this, he was always working with these things together. Like, how do you pull that rigor together, that force of intellect with something that can be really extreme, and extreme and unpredictable, and come from regions of the mind that, like, you don't have any idea where this stuff is coming from.
So this has been James Kalm, coming to you from the Johnathan Silver Foundation in Greenpoint. You can like this, share, link it up to all your social media sites, and you can leave your thoughts, ideas, comments, criticisms, and suggestions below. We just ask you to say, as always, and you can subscribe. Thank you, Kate. All right. Tang Force. Thank you.